This is the Northern Broadcasting Service, brought to you by the North Pacific's Ministry of Communications. I am Fiji Grande, and I am joined today by Bobberino and Laws. Mad Jack may also join us later, but we'll have to see about that. Today, we will be discussing the judicial elections, the recent flurry of activity in the Regional Assembly, and upcoming and ongoing events, such as the TNP NS Day Parade and Z-Day. Before we get started, I'd like to note that participants in this news show are free to voice their opinions as they see fit. As such, the opinions expressed in this episode do not necessarily represent the Ministry of Communications or the North Pacific as a whole. So with that aside, let's do some introductions and get started. Bob, you first.
Hi, I'm Bobberino, Deputy Minister of Communications, Deputy Minister of Home Affairs, and Adjutant to the Deputy Melf in terms of the NPA. Y'all should know me.
Hello, I am Laz, and I am the North Pacific Minister of Defense.
Alright, so with that, we'll get started. The first topic on today's agenda is the judicial elections. Were there any surprises about candidates in that regard, or about the results? What do you guys have to say about that?
Bob, do you want to go first on that?
Sure. One thing that kind of surprised me was Marcus Antonius. He'd showed up in the region about 2 to 3 weeks prior and had done awesome work already in Home Affairs. I believe he's now in Communications as well. I forget which other ministries he's in. And he ran for justice, and he got a good amount of votes. He got about 15% of the vote, if I recall. So good on him. It'll be interesting to see where he ends up.
Yeah, I'm really proud of the work that he's done. He's in WA Affairs, Home Affairs, and I invited him to Communications the other day, so he should be with us now as well. I think he's probably going to go pretty far. And I actually was also impressed with his showing in the judicial elections. Laws, what do you have to say about it?
I guess my big thing with the judicial elections is, especially if you look at the candidacy threads, there was not much questioning going on, I guess. And I suppose I'm guilty because I didn't ask questions myself. But it was kind of surprising to see how lax this.
Actually, I was at least in comparison to previous elections that I've been a part of in other regions, I actually thought that the questioning of the candidates was actually quite rigorous. But I guess that's just my changing experience coming to the North Pacific.
I suppose the last time I was here for an election was for the delegacy, so that got pretty.
Do you think that the delegacy elections and the general elections are taken more seriously than the judicial ones?
I would say the general. Go ahead.
If there's ever a communications issue like that where you guys start speaking at the same time, sorry, Laws, I'm going to have Bob just talk first. We'll make that a rule, because that way we'll get things sorted out.
Yeah, more important than my boss officially.
All right, so go for it, Bob. What were you going to say?
Well, in my view, though the justices serve a very important role in TNP, their outward role is much less visible and much less pronounced than the role of the delegate, vice delegate, speaker, and even attorney general. So in that purview, you tend to get a lot more candidates with a lot more on their agenda, which can lead to much more rigorous questioning rather than a justice who can't really run on much of a platform other than prior experience in TNP.
I think that's a good point, Bob. I think that's always sort of the line we tread here in TNP is trying to get new people into these elected positions versus people who already know what they're doing.
Is that something that you think the justice system can use particular improvement in?
I don't necessarily think it's a problem with our legal system. It's just sort of how this all goes. If someone does good work, he wants to do more good work. I just think we need to be cognizant of bringing new people into the.
Is there any tips that you would provide for, say, improving that system? So, being more cognizant of bringing new people into the fold, is there something that the speaker can do or the attorney general can do to bring more people in, or is what they're doing right now sort of already enough?
I think a lot of it's just initiative, right? So, obviously, someone who runs right into the region and tries to be elected probably is not going to win. I think it's really just getting into the ministry, getting into government, getting after it, and then proving you can do it, even if you don't have the experience.
That's definitely something where it really depends on who the newcomer is to the region. I think that it, at least in the current system, definitely depends on having initiative, and the more initiative you have, the more confidence you have, and hopefully the more experience you have, the more successful you're going to be.
Hopefully.
All right, so another surprising result, at least in my mind, was that Darkania and Lord Lore didn't end up victors of the judicial elections. Is that something that surprised you guys as well? And what do you think the reason is for that?
I don't know. I honestly thought Darkani was going to win because on the early parts of the voting thread, I saw a lot of support for him. Even though I feel like he openly voiced that it was kind of a joke campaign, he still got a surprising amount of the vote. If I recall, he got 36% of the vote. And Lord Lore completely blindsided me because Lore had served previously as Chief Justice. So him not getting elected kind of surprised me there.
I agree with both of those, basically. I think, how Dark ran on a campaign of Floof, which is pretty common, I won't lie. But I don't think there's that many anyone's mind Dark could have done the job, but I think that's probably why. Lore also kind of took me by surprise. I also would have suspected him to win, but that's just how it goes, and it's not necessarily a bad thing at all to bring new people in.
I completely guarantee that Dark could have done the job well because he knows the region. He's been a friggin' admin here before, so I guarantee he knows how it works enough to do the job as justice. It's just a matter of he ran a campaign on Floof, which I can't blame him for. That was.
So Darkania, I believe, got 29 votes, which is, I don't know, about 20-30%. And he placed fourth in the election, whereas Lord Lore placed fifth with substantially fewer votes. I think he came in at 23 votes. The real surprise for me was Lord Lore, because he, as you said, was previously a justice, and not just any justice, a chief justice at that. And the fact that he sort of fell so far, I don't really understand the reasoning for it. Like, I get that newcomers are always important to the region, and that bringing new people on board is always something that we're looking to do. But I don't really get why his campaign fell so far and that he received so little traction.
So I would say that is because, like Bob said, the justices are not they don't have a lot of face time with the region. And it's important to remember that Darkania was speaker for quite a while. It was a pretty prominent figure around, was an admin, pretty known name. So I think that definitely has something to play into it. Because like Bob said, the justices play a lot of behind the scenes work. And I think Darkania has had quite a lot of face time with the region.
Just simply through his role as an admin, you mean?
And his role as speaker, he knows the law inside and out.
Okay, I guess that does make a bit of sense.
In my mind, part of the equation is also the fact that current admins, Iluvatar and Silly String, were the other two justices elected. So if you're just talking about publicity, Lord Lore does not have the pure publicity that Silly String and Iluvatar have. By the way, if I haven't said it enough, great job with the forum.
Yeah, Okay, so I think we've sort of covered the judicial elections now. I think it's best to move on to the recent bills that have been discussed in the Regional Assembly. There's actually been quite a few of them. I don't think any of them, besides Bluey Gamer's amendment that recently failed, have actually gone to a vote. They're just in the discussion phase right now, but I think it might be useful to add some commentary on that. So there's two ways we could do this. The first way is we could just run through them one by one and cover each one, or if you guys are particularly interested in one above the others, we could start with that one instead. What do you think?
I'd be fine to just run through 'em. I think that'd be fine.
All right, then that's what we'll do. So we'll start with the election corruption amendment.
Okay, so this was proposed by Macedonia to prevent sort of cronyism, prevent this sort of promising of positions for.
You cut out there for a second, Laws.
Oh, sorry. So this was proposed by Macedonia, and it was essentially to stop cronyism, to stop offering jobs for votes. It received sort of a mixed review, or is receiving a mixed review, I suppose.
So my personal thoughts on the matter are, like, I definitely do not support corruption in office, and I think that if there is a system where there are actually people offering positions in exchange for votes, I think that should be discouraged. I don't actually really think necessarily it should be illegal. I think maybe it should be put into our constitution as illegal, but it's going to be one of these things that's like very self-reporting, and so I really hope that if someone is in that position, that they will self-report themselves as like, oh, a potential candidate contacted me, and if they could report that, maybe take a screenshot of that, put it into the Attorney General or something, that would be great. But I am concerned overall that something that does actually happen a bit, which is that delegates will sound off potential future ministers before the election to sort of get their cabinet in place so that they can hit the ground running. I really don't have any problem with that, and I think that it might be a bit of a gray area where people might get a little bit confused, and to have an accusation of corruption against a potential sitting delegate when it's not really deserved is something that I would like to avoid at basically any cost.
I'm sort of with you in that latter category there. I've been here for a few delegate elections now. I can't recall a single one where the cabinet was not sort of shown in advance. And I really don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's better to do that than to blindside people with ministries. But I agree, it's kind of strange because, like you see what Malfi just said in the chat. I was also contacted for certain things, but I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, so to speak. But it is definitely a gray area, and I can see why people would disagree with me on that.
I guess I've got an interesting perspective on this, seeing that I've never led a ministry yet. But I guess if I was going to be tasked with leading a ministry, I would probably want to be notified in advance so I could start writing a plan and getting things set up in terms of that ministry before I actually take the reins and start work.
I did want to just jump in. There was someone posted, I think it was Sawali in chat. He said that Lore may not have actually been Chief Justice at any point, so I think we should offer that as a correction. That's my bad, I didn't check in advance. Thanks. So we'll continue now. Are there any other thoughts on the election corruption amendment, or should we move on?
I think it's just, like you said, I think it's a very gray area. I think this is something that's been happening in the North Pacific for a very long time. I don't necessarily think it's caused us too much harm in the past, so I'm sort of on the fence about it.
I think I can be convinced either way with a persuasive enough argument. I just know that it's something where, I think that that should sort of be an avenue for delegates to pursue. I think that it's something that might actually make the region a bit more fun, even though if there is real corruption, you should know that it will hurt you and it will come back to you in the end. I also, again, think that it might actually make things a little bit more effective, so long as the delegate really is just offering positions beforehand so that they can hit the ground running. I think that, as you said, Laws, just dropping ministries on people doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But as long as it's not direct, like, I give you the position for an endorsement, that seems a little bit beyond the line for me, beyond the pale, so to speak. All right, so we'll move on now to the citizenship amendment proposed by Sawali. Just a quick summary for you guys. The citizenship amendment is essentially a proposal to make sure that if you post either on the forum or on the regional message board in 30 days, you can keep your citizenship, and that will expand it to the regional message board, which is something that we're not currently doing. Is that something that you guys support?
Well, I, for one, am happy our sloth overlord allows us to agree or disagree with him. However, I do actually agree with this amendment. As someone who's had to take a leave of absence in the past, it can be to get back on the forum and post, but I think R&B is usually a little bit quicker because you got to log in anyway to keep your nation alive.
So there's like two sides to this proposal in my mind. The opponents sort of correctly say that by allowing this to go through, that we're basically letting people just get by posting on the regional message board, which is of course what the point of the proposal is. But by doing so, because citizens have to be active on the forums to vote and to participate in the regional assembly, that doesn't necessarily make a whole lot of sense. And I do understand that proposal, but I do think that the other side is actually a bit stronger, that by allowing us to post on the regional message board as well to keep our citizenship, we're doing everyone a favor, I think, because it increases our citizenship numbers. We're a democracy. We want more newcomers and we want more people to vote. This is one way to bring them in, and this is a bridge, so to speak, between two halves of our community.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's always tough. We have our game side advocates, but it's always sort of difficult to bring people game side to the forum because the forum is so drastically different.
I think I actually personally support the amendment. I think that it probably will be beneficial to the region, but I don't actually have a whole lot of evidence to back that up. It's just sort of intuition.
To be honest with you, I want to know how it would be implemented before I could show my support to it. Not that I don't support it, it's just I'm kind of on the fence, and I want to see like where it can be implemented or proven, because the RMB can get really spammy at times. I want to see where it can be implemented before really throwing in my hat with this right.
That's definitely true. Implementation might be a concern. I think that there's probably scripts to handle it, but what you would want to do is you would want to have, people still register on the forums and have to go through the citizenship checks, but then they would just be able to post on the regional message board instead in order to keep that citizenship. What we would need to do, though, is have like a good linking between forum accounts and nations in game so that we know who's who, which might require a little bit stricter on the names in the forums, or at least like a listing of that. That's my thoughts on the matter, but I guess it just depends on what Sawali and the current administration end up figuring out to do with that, if it ends up passing. So I'm looking in the forum right now in the Agora chat, and there's a lot of people talking about this right now. So I don't actually know if we should move on. People are going back and forth whether or not it's unnecessary or if it actually brings in more votes and whatnot. And again, how to implement it.
Part of the thing I find with the proponents of this bill, like I get it if you're just trying to keep citizenship, but you actually have to go onto the forums to be able to vote, and you have to vote on the forums. So if you're keeping citizenship on the RMB and you're not checking the forums, then how would you be able to vote?
One thing that I would note there, though, Bob, is that votes don't occur every 30 days, right? I mean, it's like 2 months between elections. People, I mean, at least our RMBers don't typically check the forums a lot, but we still send out notices to the RMB and via Telegram whenever there are elections. So I don't really see why that would be a problem. Do you have any counterpoint to that?
Well, what I find is what I've heard from some RMBers is that there's some sort of rivalry between the roleplay communities on the RMB versus those on the forum, and that can keep some even active RMBers off the forums. And kind of, I don't know if this would be a good way to bridge that divide.
So I don't really know if by proposing this we're actually sort of speaking on behalf of the RMB. That's something that we want to avoid. We want to have their voices heard. But I also think that this is a way to actually encourage them to participate in these discussions. I also don't particularly think it's fair to limit any interaction between the RMB and, well, that's an unfair comparison, admittedly. But I don't think it's fair to suggest that this particular amendment should be shot down just because there might be tensions between each RMB community, because that's something that we already live with, and I don't really think it's as severe as you might think. All right, so I think we've talked enough about that. The next thing that we'll move on to is Mad Jack's delegate advisor bill that he proposed.
Sounds good.
The quick summary on this is that this particular proposal would be it would have delegate advisors be relegated by law. This sort of already exists because, advisors are very public, and the delegate can sort of appoint executive officers at any time. But on the other hand, these officers, or advisors rather, don't necessarily have to take oaths, and it may not be necessary for them to do so. It might be more convenient for them to just sort of be announced and then not be advised. And there's two sides to the argument here. On the one side, we do want to be promoting transparency. We do want we do want the delegates to sort of have some reined-in power. We don't want them to just be able to, necessarily appoint whoever they want, at least in secret. So that those are the two sides. You want transparency in the office, but by limiting this, it actually might make it more difficult for delegates to operate because it means that they'll have restrictions on who they can appoint as officers, and it probably means that their advisors are just going to be more secret rather than public, rather than out in the open as it currently is.
Yeah, so this is a tricky one. Sorry, I got there. I think this is a tricky one, especially when it comes to, if I recall, one of the main arguments that's happened for a while now is that people are concerned about delegate advisors having access to secret Discord and forum areas that normally require an oath of office to use. So this is a tricky one. I think this one might be in debate for a while.
That's certainly true. I sort of am also on the fence on this one, but I personally sort of fall towards I don't think this is needed. I think that that maybe what we could do is just have advisors take oaths of office. But even so, that seems a little formal for what the role really entails, because the advisors don't really have any power. It's just what they say to the delegate, and the delegate ultimately makes that decision for themselves. And it's certainly the case that I've been a delegate in the past. I use advisors all the time. And it's one of those things where if there's an issue that comes up, you don't want to have to go through the hassle of appointing someone else and then having them be, confirmed and that whole process and take an oath and whatnot, rather than just, getting them to join the conversation a little bit easier.
And I think what really could just defeat this is the fact that I suppose at any time, really, we have no real law, or maybe I'm completely wrong on this. I don't remember seeing any laws that show that if we ever have sort of distinctly classified information, that the delegate couldn't just share with anyone at any time in the first place. So if that's a concern for people, like there's nothing stopping Sue Alley from just starting a direct message with someone on Discord and talking about an issue. So.
Yeah, I don't know of any law that's actually related to that. I think you're right that the delegate can just share information. I know that the Freedom of Information Act can be used the other way around to get information, as long as it's, I think, a year expired. But that's a different sort of thing. I really don't know when it comes to what restrictions we currently have. But yeah. You were going to say something?
I was just asking Bob if you had any thoughts on this one.
One thing I've always wondered about this particular piece of legislation, like the constitutional right to a nation's free speech is already in the Constitution. So there's nothing that would stop Sawali from DMing me asking about, hey, what's going on in home affairs, and I got more lists or something like that. There's nothing that stops a delegate from asking anyone about any one piece of advice in an area that they're an expert on. I don't really think we need to appoint an official advisor to ask for information about someone he knows about.
So Wale just mentioned in the chat something that I was actually going to mention myself, which is that Wale has Silly and Iluvatar as advisors, and they're now both members of the court. So I remember reading in TNP law that the court doesn't serve at the behest of the delegate and shouldn't. But the fact that they're advisors for the delegate might sort of throw that off a bit. They can serve in separate roles, and I trust that they might be able to, but I don't know about anyone else in that position. And I don't really think that Swale should have to fire them either, just because they also have the role of justice.
Well, the judicial branch and the executive branch of the government are separate, and they're separate but equal, arguably. And in my mind, I don't think they should be fired from their role as advisors to the delegate, regardless of their standing within within any other branch of government. Like, it's the same thing where Tlams is a deputy minister of Home Affairs, as well as being the minister of WA Affairs. And just because they're an advisor on the executive side of things does not stop them from being on the court and vice versa. That's my view on it.
So while I do agree with you, I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a second, and that is that Home Affairs and WA Affairs are both ministries of the executive staff, and they sort of, for lack of a better word, serve at the pleasure of the delegate. That's not exactly true. There are certain ministries that are required, in my understanding, but they are appointed by the delegate, they are part of the executive staff, whereas the judicial branch is a separate branch of government in its entirety, and if they are to remain independent, might it not be best for them to be completely separate?
I still think that I don't know. I was just using Flans as kind of an example, not really trying to prove a point, but a similar, if not exactly the same, example of my point. But with that said, I still think that if their roles in government remain completely separate and it's provable that their action as court justice does not in any way influence their activity advising Sawale or vice versa, then there's no real issue there.
So the thing about that is that it's very difficult to prove, right? So I don't think they're going to get in trouble for it in any respect, and I don't really think they should. But if this were to pass, it might very well prevent them from being advisors in that sense. Anyway, I think we should move on now. I think the next topic at hand is Bluey Gamer's Forum Day bill. So this particular bill is a proposal to create a regional holiday similar to Blue Day, which recognizes the first official forum, Old Blue. And if passed, it would it would celebrate all the supporters and staff members who helped to make our forum transfer happen from Zeta boards to Zenforo.
And just a quick correction there, that was Bootsy's bill, not Blue Gamers.
Oh, sorry, did I misspeak? Yeah, I meant Bootsy. Yeah, and if at any time I make a mistake, please correct me. I would rather it be corrected in public than later.
Bluey Gamer's bill was was moving the election.
Yeah, it was the electoral delay on the elections, rather. Yeah. So I think we'll get to Bluey Gamers in a minute. I don't think there's any real discussion on the Forum Day bill for Bootsy. I don't know entirely if it's necessary, but I do think it's sort of a nice gesture, especially for the staff members who worked so hard to switch our forum over to Zenforo. And if there's ever a date to commemorate something like this, well, now would be the time.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I like holidays. I don't have too much to say about this.
In general, I do support.
I definitely support this. There's never an instance where I don't think the crap ton of hard work that the admins have put in and continue to put in to this day. I can tell from the admin request thread, they're up to their necks. That I think they should definitely be commemorated with legislation and an official TNP holiday. What's wrong with some more rum? Am I right?
Correct. I'm definitely a fan of rum. All right, so I think the last one, besides Bluey Gamer's amendment, that we've talked about that in the past, so I guess we won't bring it up again, is Iluvatar's piece on reforming the penal code. This one's a pretty complicated one. It goes back to a proposal from last year that's been in discussion for what feels like ages now. It's pretty complicated, and personally, I don't actually quite understand it. It's sort of an attempt to reform the penal code, and it at least from my limited understanding, is trying to include reforms that include defining like basic terms to clarify the original language of the penal code and remove inconsistencies, repetitive sections, and whatnot, and then add specificity to like sentencing, specifically on like how much time certain sentences hold and what punishments are available. But maybe I'm completely wrong about that, and I'd like to hear you guys correct me if I'm wrong.
I definitely agree with you. This one is pretty complicated, especially if you look at who weighs in the comments on this. I think generally it's not a bad thing to try to make the legal code more accessible, and I think defining certain terms in the past that we've not is a good thing. But like you said, this one is sort of beyond me a little bit in my knowledge of the court. So I'm more going off what the people in the comment sections have to say on this one.
I just got thrown off completely by Kyle's comment. We're not going to bring that up. Never mind. Yeah, so if there's anything anyone has to say in chat about this proposal, I think you'd probably be better than us about speaking about it. I don't want to make more mistakes than I already have. But yeah, this is a pretty complicated one, I think. It might be best if we get, perhaps in the future, an NBS interview of a Luvitar on the matter, if you'd be up for that. Just throwing that out there. Maybe that's something that we'll have in the works. Hopefully sooner rather than later, because I know that it is coming up pretty soon. But we'll see. I'll just give people a minute to type if that's what they're posting.
It's while they're doing that, we could quickly touch on the Wondrous' VC.
Oh yeah, about that. So Wondrous has very recently proposed, and actually it's beyond proposal at this point, it's sort of actually happening. It's a parliamentary style voice chat debate about bills that reach vote in the regional assembly. And I think it's an interesting idea. And I think the first time was pretty successful, actually.
I guess, I mean, I wasn't there personally, but I'm not. I guess I remember the primary concerns with this being sort of public record. Were they able to have someone type out what was spoken about, or was it just an actual just spoken?
So I don't actually think they have a record of it. I was going to make an NBS broadcast of it in order to sort of record that for posterity, but I was having such computer difficulties that day that it didn't end up working out. I don't know if that's something that we can provide as a service later for from the Ministry of Communications. I think it's something that we would aim to do. But I think that like a general criticism of them is, yes, they should probably have some recorder to type out what does go down, or at least record it and then type it out themselves. Another general criticism of it is that not everybody wants to voice chat. There's certain people who are a little bit averse to it for, well, understandable reasons. Of course, they're welcome to participate just in text, but it's something that it's sort of a new format for a lot of people. And I think that these sort of debates should definitely continue to go on as they usually do in the forums. And it shouldn't just be limited to this. So while I think that Wondrous doing this sort of a parliamentary debate is a cool idea, I don't really ultimately think it's very useful, at least in its current iteration.
Yeah, I was definitely, my concern with it was definitely, not even people who are averse, but people who simply don't have the ability to participate in voice chat. I think they'd really be missing out. So, I don't know, I'm always been a fan, and we have a saying sort of in the RP that it doesn't matter if it's not on the forum, which I think in some respects, especially with sort of our legal debate, should be especially true. I think we're doing our citizens a disservice if it's not publicly available.
So we'll definitely pass that along to Wondrous. I honestly, though, overall, I think it is a cool idea, and if anything, it will probably serve to make it, like, if we get it recorded, and if there are at least some public records of it having occurred, and maybe the transcript, it might end up making the regional assembly more accessible to more people, and sort of more popular overall, which is ultimately the goal.
So I guess my point there, I think would be more okay with these if they were sort of unsanctioned by the Speaker's office. If these sort of just, we don't use it much anymore, but if this just sort of happened in the Agora, that people would come to discuss laws, which is, I sort of think the point is, I'd be more comfortable with that than sort of a sanctioned debate by the Speaker's office.
This is also very official, so it is a sanctioned debate, but it has, specific times for talking, and it has a very formal atmosphere to it. I actually kind of like that, I'll admit, because it does mean that you don't have a lot of people speaking over each other, which is sort of the point of that proposal. I think it might be better if it is public, and an unsanctioned event. I would like to see more people using voice chats more often, but that's just me as an NBS minister, or a minister of communications, rather. But, I don't think that means that we should restrict the speaker in that regard. I think it is ultimately a cool idea, and I'll sort of stick with my position on that.
No, I agree. I think it's neat. I think it's something we don't do enough. Agora used to be more used in the past, but I think it's I think it's a neat idea from Wondrous. I think it's a good step towards sort of modernizing the speaker and making the speaker more accessible.
I personally think that, Fiji is right. It kind of does have a formal atmosphere to it. I was in the, we discussed this in the speaker's server, and we, on voice chat a couple of weeks ago, and we kind of made a general blueprint of how it would go, and he's right. We have pretty specific rules, regulations, how long people can speak, etc. And he laid those out in his introductory post about the program. I believe he posted it in the Agora on the forums, but I could be wrong. He linked it in Regional Assembly Private. And in my mind, we revisited this on voice chat, I think on Friday, actually. And we kind of loosened things up a bit. And while I would like to see more organic discussion of this bill, I still think this is a very good step in the right direction, in terms of making the Speaker's office more accessible to the common man.
Thanks for that, Bob. All right, so I've been looking at the chat this whole time, and it doesn't look like anyone has anything else to say on the bills and whatnot. So we'll move on to the North Pacific Army, and I know that's a topic that's close for both of you. Laws, congratulations once again for being the new Minister of Defense, and thanks for taking the time to do the North Star interview with me. That was very much appreciated, especially on such short notice. So I guess what we'll start by discussing is, thanking Zazumo for his service over the last few months. He's definitely been, at least in my mind, an excellent Minister of Defense, and I think he's left very big shoes to fill. And I'm sure that Laws will continue that legacy. All right, I'll leave the floor open for you guys.
Thank you.
Is it Zazumo or Zazumo? I've always said it as Zazumo.
I've said Zazumo, and I'm gonna keep saying it as that, but I'll have to ask him in the future to see how it's said correctly. Go ahead, Laws.
I suppose, in the topic description, it's the discussion is about me, so I won't really talk about me so much as I will my goals for the term, I suppose. I'm starting to realize that Zaz built an incredibly well-connected network of friends and allies, which is amazing. I'm going to DM almost every other day asking for, hey, are you the new Minister of Defense, that kind of thing, to see how far his influence spread is kind of amazing. So definitely working in to fill those shoes. But I guess at the beginning right now, I've just been trying to sort of change up the ministry, getting more people involved. I made Quiet Dad the Chief of Staff, and I made Malfi Malfi, I don't know. Malfi, how do you pronounce your name?
It's Malf, I've asked.
Okay.
It's Malfi if you want to piss him off. It's Malf if
Well, anyway, we got some new positions to try to get some newer blood into actually running the ministry proper, the Ministry of Defense. And normally our officers focus on the missions, but I wanted to bring more people into the forum side. So I thought that would be nice to do. Then, we kicked it off sort of into high gear. We've already participated in some anti-fascist raids, lots of training operations, and Bob led a pretty wildly successful op last night, so we're doing well.
No, that sounds excellent. I just looked at the chat. It looks like Zaz has just confirmed that my pronunciation of his name, Zazumo, is correct. Although I'm sure we'll probably just go by calling him Zaz in the future because that's just so much easier.
True.
All right, so welcome on board, and I'm definitely glad to see you in the Executive Council at this point. And I'm sure that we'll get along just fine, especially given how we've started.
You cut out there, damn Fiji. Anyway, Bob, any thoughts on the current MPA? No. Only your job rides on this.
You're doing a great job thus far. And I'm definitely impressed with the number of training operations we've done. My thought is that I really want a target bot similar to that other organizations have. Number one, to make officers' job easier of grabbing a list, making that completely irrelevant. And number two, I think that would make us faster switchers. And that's something I want to see us work on is speed between targets, and as well as number of targets per operation hit.
I guess I will say right now, I have absolutely no computer skills, so I cannot make a bot like that. But we do have some pretty impressive people in the MPA that might be able to do that. Personally, I've always been a little averse to using bots, just because it feels sort of worse when the bots are wrong than I am for some reason, but I don't know. I guess part of me likes having the officers do it the manual way, but we could definitely, a bot would definitely help us out in terms of targets and time, I believe.
I guess I would also have to admit that I'm a little bit script and bot averse myself, but that's just because the last time I was raiding, it was with the Black Riders, who were affected by the Predator scandal, so I'm a little bit paranoid with that from now on.
Yeah, of course.
Which I guess is understandable. The one thing that I would say is the big surprise when I joined the North Pacific was, first upon learning that there was an active military, because not many regions have that. I guess I shouldn't have been surprised because TNP is like the largest and single most powerful, arguably single most powerful GCR. But at the same time, I was surprised at how few operations are conducted. Not the frequency of them, but the number of regions hit per night. At least back in my time with the Black Riders, we were hitting, I'd say on average, like 30, 40 per update. We would only do major, of course, but I don't know if that's sort of a difference in culture, or if that's something that's simply not within the capabilities anymore without the Predator script. I do know that I've spoken a bit with Bob and Dino about this, and they say that there's some raiders who currently today can hit incredible numbers, especially if they're working in groups. I think Bob shouted out Lily, but I don't really know anything about that. Do you have any thoughts about that, Laws?
So Lily has sort of rating down to a science, and yeah, I think Lily hits upwards of 100 targets a night sometimes in sort of crazy operations. But I think it definitely, yeah, Bob just posted it there in the chat. I think it's definitely a culture thing. The MPA does not focus either on defending or rating. It's sort of the independent manifesto we follow. So in that we don't have the same culture as places like the Black Riders or the Blackhawks or whatever. We don't have that. All right, hey, we're going to hit X number of targets a night. We show up, keep our skills sharp, and sort of move on until we really need it in a hold or something like that. And I know, again, we don't specialize in anything, but most of our officers, if not all of our officers, are very skilled in triggering and switching. I know I take very great pride in my trigger and switch ability. I like to update regional pages before I even have to switch to the next target. So I think that's always great practice to know how to do. So you can see here in the chat some of the other MPAers talking about hitting 100 plus targets at night. But it would definitely be more difficult for us with our culture than somewhere like the Blackhawks, where it's what they live and breathe.
That's definitely understandable. Go for it, Bob.
To be fair, the Blackhawks have kind of deteriorated in the quality of their ops recently. I still live by the manifesto that a good team can hit 50 in an update. With one team and a fairly fast point, we can hit 50 in an update. So with two teams, a target bot handling, finding targets, making our work a lot easier, we could easily hit 100 in an update if we had enough numbers for two teams.
So I know for me, I can pretty comfortably switch in probably under 40 seconds. I think that's something that takes a lot of practice, especially now that we don't have a bot right now or anything like that. But I guess it would just come down to how we train and how we'd have to continue to train.
A question for you, Laz. Do you use Nation States Plus by any chance?
No, I don't actually. I do most of my finding completely manually. I find the process very relaxing and cathartic. So sometimes I'll just sit down with like a cup of coffee and find my targets. I just enjoy doing it that way. I look back to.
What I meant was for puppet switching. So if you.
Nope, I do it all manually.
I'd be curious in the future to know how, if you remember like multiple different passwords or if it's all the same, but we'll discuss that in private. I am just like interested, you know?
I don't plan on anyone ever finding out my password. That's pretty much what I do. I keep a bunch of switches on one password and one Gmail account. And it's all, anything anything with the MPA, it's all about organization. The second you lose your organization is the second you lose the op. If you come in prepared right, switching and pointing is very, very simple.
People in chat are screaming for me to join the NPA. That's something that I actually have considered in the past, but I will admit I have been a pocket Fenda, so I know everyone will call me lame, but it's actually been a little bit of a transition coming to TNP, and a bit refreshing actually to see that we are in fact independent.
So there is the Fenda jokes, and we will make them at you if you join us.
Which I understand and appreciate and accept in advance. Go for it.
But ultimately, detagging is fending. It's not really even up to argument, as sort of quaint as it is. But it would also be great if you could join, because then we would have the entire executive staff in the MPA. Quiet Dad is right there. Per our code, no one can be compelled into participating in NPA ops if they don't want to, unless in the event of regional security. So if you joined the NPA, you could only participate in our defend ops and not in a raid. So
we don't tend to tag that often as compared to when we detag. To be honest, I think we detag more than we tag. I prefer tagging to detagging because I don't have to look up a WFE, but that's just a personal preference. And generally me being a little bit lazy when it comes to this. Not really. And yes, I am very lazy. Thank you, Bluey. Coming from the guy who hasn't led an op in like a month and a half.
Oh, got him.
I will admit I am very tempted to join the NPA. I like the culture that you guys have there and how you stick together as a group, and I think that's really neat. Every single day that passes, though, I seem to get more and more endorsements. And I feel like at this point it would be such a bummer to lose like 800 plus at one time. But I am still tempted, and I might actually do it. I don't want to announce that I will just yet, but I think it might be something that I might do.
You're definitely welcome. We have probably my favorite group of people in the North Pacific over in the MPA, and we have a good time in the barracks and just chatting and whatever. So anytime you want to lose those endorsements, we'll have you.
Well, with that recommendation, I don't know how I can refuse. All right. So with that, we'll move on. The next topic on our list are our TNP events, both recent and current and upcoming. I know there's a couple that are in the works, but currently what we're doing is we're doing a parade, so to speak, for Nation States Day around our allies and embassies around the NS world. It's a cruise, Sawale. It's an NS cruise. I affectionately call it the Armada, but you may call it a cruise to be diplomatically correct.
It's the Nation States Armada.
Yeah, Bob, see, that's what would be better. I know TNP Navy was a name that was thrown out a bit earlier, but...
No, absolutely not.
I couldn't help but bring it up. All right, so yeah, we're a cruise. We're entirely peaceful. Anyway, so it's been pretty fun, I will say, going around. I think that there's a fine line, though, between being happy and going around and reminding people that we exist and spamming their regional message boards. So we have to be a little careful for that. And I do think it's just overall a nice thing to do. But an earlier topic that I had posted was if this had any foreign affairs effects, or if that was the intent. And I got a message from Silly String earlier confirming that no, in fact, it's just simply a nice thing to do. It won't have any foreign affairs effects, which I wouldn't really have expected anyway, given how small an operation it is. I guess the big thing is rather what improvements can be made if we do this again next year to make it a tradition. There's been a few questions as to whether or not maybe we could switch faster, if we could do it all at once, if we should go the other way and spend more time in the regions and make more of an event out of it. Did you guys have any specific thoughts on what improvements could be made, if any?
I kind of generally missed this event, even though I think it's still going on. So I'll sort of take a backseat in this conversation.
Well, you're welcome to still join. It's still ongoing, so you can just create a nation and follow us around, parading around all the embassies. I think we're currently in Spiritus, but I might be wrong. I'll have to check. So I guess one thing we could do for the future is make it more publicly announced so that more people know about it in advance. I know that it was posted on the forum pretty well in advance. It was something that was in the works, and I think we did post it in the Agora, but it's something that I'll have to check again. But I guess maybe make it more known, ping more people, and so on and so forth. Is that something that you would recommend, Laz, because you didn't hear about it, or is it something where you just think you weren't online at the time?
Well, I definitely heard about it. I just am up to my ears constantly and things to do. So I heard about it, but I believe it was pinged in the Culture Executive channel. I don't recall seeing it in the Agora. Maybe I just missed it.
That's probably my mistake.
Yeah, the pings ended up in the Culture Executive channel. I personally think they should be in Agora.
Agora would get more people, I think, involved, which is probably a good thing. But you might also see people who we don't necessarily want to come along for the cruise. You might see people who are more prone to spamming and whatnot. So I think that might be part of the reasoning for the decision to post it simply in Culture, if that was the case.
I can understand that thinking. And so while I just wait, sorry, it was posted in the Grand Plaza once, and then he said the rest were in the culture group. So
All right, so I think overall, yeah, just making it more public is probably a good idea. I've actually had a lot of
which
fun
is
with
always our
Cruise.
problem.
It's always the problem.
So I think that's always the issue is outreach whenever it comes to events.
So that's just something that culture and the executive branch can improve on in general.
I'm not even sure how exactly we can improve on it. It's just, you know, TNP is it's a big place for sure, but I feel like there's usually more of a core group of people that participate in these sorts of events. I mean, I think it's always the challenge is to get more people into.
Would you recommend, say, telegramming everyone in the region, for instance, to try to get more newcomers involved?
Not for this. I think we do it well the way we do it with voting, but I don't think necessarily ministry sponsored events should be going to the entire region as a as a scripted telegram. But I think even just working on our attendance for people who are active on the forums or more active on the RMB. I mean, I think it's always something we can try for. I just am not exactly sure how we go about it.
Yeah, that's definitely true. So, another TNP event that happened pretty recently, and this is not actually a North Pacific event, it's actually just one for nation states overall, as I'm sure everyone at this point knows, and that is Z-Day, zombies, and their effects on the world. It happened like 2 weeks ago now or something, so it's a bit late, but I figured we'd cover it now, if ever. My thing on this is I don't really know how to compare it between years. I feel like we did pretty well, and we did place very high, but I don't really know like how much did we improve on, especially since you know the challenge does seem to get harder each year, and this year had some new twists.
So this year was insane with like the zombie infection rating. I think we still ended up doing better than last year. I mean, we had Aristide as former English colony curing like billions and upon billions per cure missile, which was pretty cool to see. Yeah, I think this Z-Day was definitely significantly more difficult, but it also gave me the hardest laugh I've had in a long time when Great Bites friggin' yeeted McMasterdonia to the rejected realms. I was laughing so hard.
I really still can't believe she did that, but I'm so glad that she did.
Yeah, Kyle just posted our survival rate, 54%, which is pretty good. And I think we all got a laugh out of it. I made some bad paint art that some people saw, so pretty solid Z-Day in my opinion.
And just so if people don't know already, Suwali posted above that I think it was WADP sponsored awards for it to show who was someone who helped with the cure a lot, and it actually awards people who went the other way as well. One thing that I was it's not WADP, it's just TNP awards, I guess. One thing that I was really impressed by is like our survival rate overall. The fact that we, as a region of 7,000 plus nations, managed to get over 50% survival rate is just incredible, and that's not something I expected at all.
Yeah, we had people working very hard on Z-Day, which was awesome to see. I posted my bad paint art in the text channel if anybody wants to see it.
I saw that. That was great. Thanks for sharing that again. I didn't actually see some of those the first time around.
You're welcome. I plan on making a lot more during my term as minister, and I still plan on just making random paint art for all our events coming up. So I don't know. Look forward to that in the.
Excellent. All right, so I don't really know if this has been publicly announced yet, but there is a Harry Potter event coming up for the Ministry of Culture. So if you want to get involved with that, contact Culture. I won't say more than what I've already said, which is essentially nothing. I want to have them release it when they get the chance. But if that's something that you might be interested in, do contact the Ministry of Culture and see if you can try to get involved. All right. So at this point, yes,
We seem to have lost Bob.
Bob is AWOL. Okay, that's fine. We're pretty much at the end of the main discussion events anyway. I was just going to cover perhaps the difference between the North Star and the Northern Lights, just briefly as a sort of a public service announcement, because there have been changes within the Ministry of Communications lately, if that's fine.
Yeah, go right ahead.
All right, so as many of you already know, the North Star and the Northern Lights are now two separate publications from the Ministry of Communications. The North Star takes several of the repetitive sections from the Northern Lights and forms its own newspaper with it, and will serve primarily as an update, both for domestic uses but also for abroad for our embassies. And it's basically going to include the same sections every time, which might be the Spotlight. It'll be the WA Digest, Regional Assembly Highlights, the NPA Bulletin, and maybe a few others if we get ideas about that. Anyone's welcome to participate if they end up joining the Ministry of Communications. Whereas, so the Northern Lights is going to primarily now focus, it'll remain TNP oriented, but it'll have a little bit more of a focus on NS as a whole, and we're going to put more of a focus on allowing guest writers from other regions to write articles for the Northern Lights. Another thing is that the articles will be more lengthy and hopefully with better quality, with more relevant, insightful, and engaging information. That's at least the hope. It's a lot to live up to. But as a result of that, we're going to be shifting the publication dates. It will no longer be run on a month-to-month cycle. There will be fewer actual posts of it, and each issue will have fewer actual articles within them. But I hope that overall it will be more interesting. I'd rather, and this is to quote Silly String, I really hope I'm not quoting the wrong person, but I'd rather have you saying, gosh, this is great, I want more, than, hold on, this is terrible, and I don't think this was worth my time. So that's the big change with the Northern Lights and the North Star, and I hope that we can make that switch successful and worth everyone's time. So that's all I wanted to say on that regard. Again, if you want to help with the North Star or the Northern Lights, or with this broadcast, the Northern Broadcasting Service, please feel free to either contact me with DM or via Telegram on Nation States, or just straight up apply to the Ministry of Communications in the executive chat, in the executive staff applications under the docs. That's what I meant to say. Anyway, thanks so much for your time. Laws, did you have anything else that you wanted to add to this broadcast before we finish up?
I'm just going to plug the MPA. Join the MPA if you haven't. It's a lot of fun. Come hang out with us.
Excellent. Again, you would do that under the docs as well, is where you would apply, right?
Yep, under the docs, there's a military sign-up. Just post the oath as you see it. And one of our deputies or adjutants will come get you. We'll get you into our Discord, and we'll get
You cut off there again at the last second.
Yep, just under the docs, right into the military sign-up. Post the oath, and we'll get you started.
All right, so that's it for the Northern Broadcasting Service today. We're going to close off this broadcast. Thanks so much for your time, and thanks for listening to everyone who's out there. Definitely enjoyed this broadcast, and I hope that what we discussed today was both interesting, worth your time, relevant, engaging, and so forth, and that it was, in fact, accurate. I tried to make a point of correcting myself if I made mistakes, and in the future, again, if that does happen, just post it in chat, and we'll try to pick up on it. So thanks so much for your time. Thanks for listening. This has been the Northern Broadcasting Service, closing off for today.